Everybody, welcome back to View from the Top podcast. We're so glad you're here. This is where we help growth-minded men who desire momentum in their business, their family, and their finances get through the valleys and up the mountain to their very own view from the top. As I said, I am glad you're listening in today because today we're going to be unpacking the financial side of running a business when you are making money. So often we talk about the struggles of getting to the point where we're making money, but we're going to talk about what happens when you're actually making some money. We're going to dive in what to do with the extra money, how to communicate profit to your team, to your spouse, answer some of those questions, or at least our opinions about, do we reinvest it all? Do we save some? Just what should we do? Plus, we're going to cover the potential consequences of just staying in reactive mode, because we all know sometimes when things are good, we can get lazy. And so we want to make sure that we're not staying in reactive mode. We can be in proactive mode. And what does that look like? So whether you're just starting out, scaling up, or somewhere in between, this conversation we're going to have today really promises some valuable insights for every stage of your business and entrepreneurial journey. So we're going to dive in. I've got Big A in the studio along with a special co-host who's joining us for the conversation today, David Littlejohn. Welcome, guys. I'm glad you're here.
Wally, what's up?
Good things, good things.
Yeah.
Welcome, David.
David, you doing
Stoked
well?
to be here today. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, we're pretty stoked to be here as well. You know, Wally and I are in the same studio today. We thought we would give this a try and see how it works. And you're our guinea pig today, David, as co-host of this show. We're getting to be in the same studio. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know. Well, we're going to test it out anyway.
Yeah,
hey,
we'll make it up
Wally,
as we go.
Yeah, that's right. That's the best way. Because we're talking a little bit about budgeting and talking about business and profits and things like that, I was curious to what kind of budget guy are you? Like, are you heavily involved in? I know the answer to this. I'm doing it for the audience because I know. And David, we're going to get to you in a second. But what's budgeting look like to you?
Yeah, we've on some of the episodes we've touched on this a little bit, but that's a really direct question. So for me, I'm pretty used to be spreadsheet savvy with my budget. And over the years, I've gone to more of youneedabudget.com as an app. There's mint.com. There's everydollar.com. I think that's an app as well. And so there's some pretty cool tools out there that help me really plug all the numbers in, do what they call sinking funds, which is, for right now, my wife and I, right, at some point we want to get a new car for her. And so every month we just put a little bit of money into that account. And the software does a great job of keeping track of all that. So I'm not trying to make up a bunch of money. I want to buy a car or whatever. And so I'm pretty got all the numbers in the right spaces for the most part.
Yeah, I'm not surprised in the least. I'm not. And so we'll save me for last here. David, what about you? What kind of budget guy are you?
If I really get into it, there's sort of this DNA for different people, right? And I think at the core level, you seem to have spenders and savers. And I'm a native saver. And so the budget process, when I early on in both my career and early on, when I was really so broke I could barely pay attention even, was spreadsheets and paying attention to where every single penny went. Today, it's more like rules and buckets, right? So the rule is rule number one in finance: spend less than you make, right? I mean, that's just the simplest rule out there. And then the rest of it is design an operating budget within that is the big stuff, right? So I'm not looking at a super granular level. And I'm sure later we'll get a chance to unpack this. It's not that I don't know it and I can't find it, but that there was diminishing marginal return to tracking, say, every stick of gum that was purchased. Because there's a time trade involved in that. But I think it's important to categorically know where your money is going and to have a sense of how much money is moving into and out of your life or just through your life. So I'm big on just having a general finger on the pulse at all times, but I'm not a super spreadsheet guy anymore. We track it all. I can find it all because, the businesses are all in, bookkeeping software, and the personal budget is all electronically tracked so that we can see where the money's moving through. But my wife and I are both very much on the same page this way, that spend less than you make. and it solves lots of problems. So that's a really simple budgeting categories, but that's where we come from. And we're both native savers, so it's not hard.
So David has one category, spend less than you make category.
Yeah.
Well, that's
So
not like,
do you manage by the checkbook number then? Is that what you're saying? Like, hey, there's not enough money to go eat out, or like,
no. So the number one category is, we know X number of dollars are coming in per month. And so like I kind of have a formula that says X number of dollars come in, we have our tithe component, and then we have the household budget, and we have savings. This is a fun one. Like I have the entrepreneur's budget, which is the rule of 7. And this kind of came out of, and I don't know, like this came out of it was born on my radio show like 6-7 years ago. But the entrepreneur's budget is days of the week, where you categorically say, okay, so start on Monday, and you go, you're going to work Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to pay your taxes. Okay. Or you're going to work Monday and Tuesday.
Well, that's disgusting. Like, when you said that,
it's no fun.
That's terrible rule.
That's disgusting.
Just stay with me because it'll make sense. So what happens is Monday, Tuesday are for taxes. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are for your household budget, which is about 45%. And then Saturday is to save, Sunday is to give. Okay. And if you look,
I only want to work on Saturday and Sunday then. I don't want to work those other 5 days. Just sign me up for the weekend.
It's a mnemonic to remember, right? It's the percentages are between your federal and state. You're probably about a third of your money is going to go to taxes. And what happens is if you make less money, less goes to it. So you get to put more back into your own coffer, which is good because it's progressive in nature. If you're making a bunch of money, though, just assume more is going into the government coffer. And these are these really big master categories. So we know that we're going to operate, this much money comes in, about half of it is the household budget, about 15% of it's going to be going to tithe and giving. Another 15% is going to go to savings, and the rest is pretty much going to get eaten in taxes. So they're big budget categories.
It's really funny, David. Like, I thought that I explained things in detail. You lost Big A
back on Monday, your third day on Wednesday. I was done.
So what does that tell us about your budgeting technique?
Well, I can tell you what.
Know now.
I categorically know where my money's at too. It goes into the bank and it goes out of the bank, and so that's. I'm not a budget guy. I've never been a budget guy my whole career. And okay, go ahead and throw your stones at me. Robin and I were broker than a convict when we started, and we said, "Hey, let's make good decisions. Let's live on less than we make. Let's make some good investments." And we've done those things, and God has honored it. But I'm not a guy that I got a buddy of mine. I was telling Wally about this a few minutes ago. Like, he tracks every dollar on a spreadsheet, and I even told him it gets down to, he knows what the kilowatt hours are in the electricity cost, and he knows what the cubic feet of water cost. And I was filling up my pool one day years ago, and I said, Gadget, I call him Gadget, obvious reasons. I said, Gadget, we just built this pool, and I said, I wonder what it's going to cost to fill it up. And I hear this tick, 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 tick on his keyboard. I said, what are you doing? He goes, how long is your pool? What's the deepest end? How wide is it? And I told him. He said, it'll be $109.36. I said, how do you know that? He said, well, I just pulled up my water spreadsheet, and I know how much it is a cubic foot, and I know how many gallons you've got. And he was right. DNA. That's what made me mad. He was right when I got the bill.
It's the DNA of some folks, though. You know what I mean? Like some folks, they need that to balance something out, right? Mm-hmm. So that level of accuracy brings some peace in their life. And so it's like a security blanket for them to know, where other people, it's almost toxic, right? And so budgets can be real 4-letter words for some folks, and it becomes oppressive. Like, great, you're telling me I have to live this way. And, what I try to tell folks is, well, let's figure out how you're wired, and then work with that wiring so that the money can move into and out of your life in a healthy way where you don't put yourself behind the power curve. So,
David, you just said something I want to tack on a sentence too that I think is really important. You said a lot of people think of budget as restrictive. For so many years of my life, I only saw the budget as what I couldn't do. Instead of, I saw the expense side, like what I was spending. I didn't actually see the income as part of the budget. Like, I didn't think of it as like, I get to choose, right? So you're spot on, man. There's, I think if we think of it as both, there's a pro and a con. There's an income and an expense side. And it's a tool. And if we use it right in the proper way, right? Then it can be beneficial to some people for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. It's kind of funny the way you just prescribed that. For me though, you said we got to figure out your personality and how you manage that. And because that feels very restrictive to me. Right. In the way you described that. Yeah. When we get off the call, I may give you a call. We may have to talk through that a little bit. It's I'm in the fourth quarter of my life. I'm probably not going to change at this point. I probably could, but I really don't want to. David, you've got such a wealth of knowledge and experience in dealing in finances. And that's the reason we wanted you to be a co-host on today's topic as we talk about different management styles, the things that we do with profit, how we invest our money. Give us just a little overview of kind of what you take people through in regards to dealing in profit in their business. Guy comes into your office, you're helping him make some decisions. Kind of walk us through that in a second for like when you're making money in your business. First of all, how do we know we're making money? Let's tackle that first in one of the conversations that you have with your clients.
Sure. So it's not fully prescriptive, right? I look at it as there's sort of people talk about lead funnels in business all the time. Well, there's a certain sort of funneling process to getting data about finances. And it's so embedded in who you are too, right? Money tells how your relationship with money is really interesting. Everybody's got their own backstory to it, and everybody views it a little bit different, right? For some people, it's a scorecard. For others, it's the opposite, right? And for some people, it's a scarce resource, and so they treat it different than people that have, the abundance mentality versus the scarcity mentality. So I'm sort of assessing that as I go with folks and getting to know the person at the same time, because the benefit of experience, because I've been doing this for more than 2 decades, is being able to, it feels like intuition, but it's probably not. It's probably a learned skill of matching up that personality and how things work. So usually I'm looking for, can somebody give me, I use the term napkin plan, but it's like, can you describe to me how your business functions and how money moves through it in a simplistic enough way that you understand it well enough to communicate it to me? And then I can start to understand it and latch onto that framework for your ideas. And then can you tell me how money moves through your personal life too? And then the trick is to start to marry those up and see how they look, and look for opportunities to optimize. So that whole process, though, it's when I say it's personal, right? So Big A, you have this way of how you tackle finances that's natural for you. Wally, you got a different process. We meet, they would be, the experiences would have overlap, but they'd be unique for both of you because I got to ask different questions to get to that understanding. Some of it's going to be, well, why does it drive you this way? And others, it doesn't matter why. It's like, well, what are you doing? Regardless, it's to figure out, okay, 1, is there really profit there? And then 2, what's your value system look like? Then we can marry up the optimization to your values and how the money's moving through the system. So I don't know if that's a real satisfying answer, but the reality is that we all have different, we have a lot of common things, but then we have the different things. The different things make all the difference. And I think that a good consultative process is how you capitalize on the differences and then turn them into strengths.
Go ahead.
I want to dive into this a little bit. So I appreciate that answer. But when you think about making money in your business, here's some of the things that I hear, right, throughout my career. And I've even believed some of these things at different times, right? My sales are more this year than they were last year. So I must be profitable. Or something along a similar lines of that is like, because my revenue is X, right? Therefore I must be, making money. And a lot of times I hear this, and there's been this situation in my household where my wife, I was the business owner, entrepreneur I am, and she doesn't run those circles per se. And so she sees a number and it's like, oh wow, like we're like, wow, that's pretty amazing.
Let's
like,
go shop.
Yeah, we're doing really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we, like, obviously there's some practical things, right? Like if someone's not keeping track of their money using some type of financial software. Let's just use QuickBooks. There's other ones too. Wave app is another one. So there's software. Software can help us tell the story with the numbers, right? And the way we do that is, what are some things that, some like reports or ways we can look at our numbers in our accounting system to know if we're making money or not?
Wow. All right. So before that, because you're getting into the accounting, like, and it's not that it's forensic in nature, but it is. And like, if I didn't know anything about a business, I'd want to get into the accounting software and see where the money was moving as a way to discern, like, are you making any money? But I think before that, there's a little bit of a framework question that I would go to first. And that's why I go back to that napkin plan of like, every business brings money in the form of revenue, and then it has expenses. And I think the expenses are where the nightmare comes in, right? Because we've talked about amongst the iron sharpens iron community, right? So a bunch of men in this community. One of the things is, does somebody's business model include paying themselves? Right? You would think that that's an obvious thing, but it's not how everybody necessarily designs it.
No, it's not.
Most people don't.
Yeah, they don't make themselves an expense.
Right.
Their income is an expense of the business. It has to be able to pay them. And you can forget that when designing the business. It sounds like, no, you couldn't. No, you can. People see all of the other expenses, and the way they're thinking about it, I believe, is, well, let me run this business, and whatever profit is left will be the part that pays me. But the profit, there's a minimum viable amount to even make doing the business worth it. That should be part of the expense of the business, because if you had employees, you have to pay them. So that's an expense to the business. Now you can
to replace you.
Yeah, well, and you can nuance this because this is where I think people they'll get caught in the details of the language rather than what the intention of the language is, which is like, your employees are an investment. Great. But it's still a cost to the business in terms of money going out the door to them. Is it an exchange of value? It better be, or you should get different employees, right? But if you're doing that, then money went out the door. Those employees need to help bring money back in the door. Okay. And so that's part of the expense metric. And then what's left becomes eligible for Uncle Sam to go after it. And then what's after that is what falls in your lap to go spend. And so you need to make sure that there's profit for you, or profit to reinvest in either the business or other places to generate more. That's making your money productive. But you need to cover your own costs too. And I think people should treat that like an expense in the equation of their business model. You can find that in the accounting, right? You can find that in the QuickBooks statement. So you can look at an income statement and you can look at the different cash flow categories of where's money being spent. You can look at the balance sheet to see assets versus liabilities. And so that's ways that you can extract this data from there. But I'm careful about advising that to people, because what a lot of entrepreneurs hear is, oh, great, I got to become an accountant now. And I go, no, you don't. But you should be able to draw for me in like really big pictures. My business makes money this way. My business has these costs. And then my business has to either pay people that pay taxes, or pay taxes and then pay people that pay taxes. And that's kind of the big lobes for every business. If you can't understand your margin, because you hit this one earlier, Wally, when you said, hey, I've got an increase in revenue or an increase in sales. I go, great. But if you spent more money than you generated, you actually shrank your margin, or maybe even inverted it to where you're running at a loss. And you can't make up losses in volume.
Right.
So are you whether you are a believer or advocate or whatever, the profit first model, you just kind of described that in your own words, those big buckets. They call it profit first because in their model, there's a book out there called Profit First. Anybody can easily go read that. I suggest you do, whether you choose to follow it or not. The principles line up exactly with what you just said. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is take out something. And everybody thinks profit. They're like, oh, I can't take out, but it's start with a small percentage and take that out as profit first, and then owner's compensation, and then what is it? Taxes, and then operating costs, something like that. There's four major buckets, right? But to your point, it allows you to put those things in those buckets, and very clearly, without all of the QuickBooks every class and every category and every item. And like, just very quickly you can tell and you can see, am I making money or not?
Mm-hmm. No, I
really
think
good.
I think it's actually a very functional approach, right? So the book and so forth, you probably joke because behind the scenes, I've kind of said like, well, there are parts of it that are irritating because it's
David
a little
finds
out of
something
sequence.
irritating. David finds announcement to everyone.
Yeah.
We love you, David.
Yeah.
Keep going. I've cut you off.
Well, as a planner, the taxes are related to the income, and so that's pretty simplified when it's laid out. But I do have to remind anybody in businesses there's a learning curve to it. So when you first get started, figure out how to make a profitable business, and then figure out how to optimize it secondary, right? And so those skills get polished with time and repetitions, and so you learn as you go. So I don't expect anybody to come out of the gate and immediately know stuff. I mean, heaven's sake, two plus decades of doing this, and I'm still learning to this day, right? And they keep changing the rules, and you have to relearn stuff, or you have to learn new things because the rule is different than it used to be. So maybe irritation is not the right word. It's just I think it needs to be sort of entrepreneur 101 and understand that is the beginning, not the ending. So for folks that are like, well, I did a plan like this, so we're good. It's like, well, you did a plan like that to validate that it's working and to stabilize yourself. But I think entrepreneurs need to grow too. And so you got to flex other muscles. You can't just stop with profit first.
That's good. Big A, question for you. So now that you've had multiple businesses, and so you've had businesses where you've decided, figured out, understood you're making money, right? So let's say for a listener out there, let's say that they're following profit first. So I've got some money. I'm making money. How have you thought about like reinvesting that money, all of it, part of it, back into your business, into other investments? Like, have you had a strategy for that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a strategy. We just visited that annually, and then we would take a distribution, and we would agree with the partners. Historically, I've had one, maybe two partners, and annually we would get together if we made money, and we would decide annually. It was like, hey, the business is good. We're going to stay right here. We're going to distribute the money out. Each partner is going to take a draw, and we're going to keep on. Or there's some bigger visions that we have. We want to grow the business. We want to buy a piece of property. We want to buy more inventory. We're going to take half of the profits out in a distribution, and we're going to reinvest. And so for me, there's never been a concrete, this percentage every year we're going to reinvest back into the company. For us, it was just decided annually.
For me, it was similar. We took an annual approach pretty much to like our planning, what we wanted to accomplish, whether that was, sometimes it was operational like type expenses. So more of a capital expense for us. I was in the software industry for a number of years, SaaS, software as a service. And so that model was, we had to reinvest a bunch of our funds back into building up the new versions of our software. Right. So if we didn't, we were going to fall behind. So that was something we had to intentionally keep track of. And so that was part of my reinvestment. Like, how do we want to show up, our go-to-market strategy? How do we want to show up in the marketplace? What kind of money is that going to take to do that? Both from a development design perspective, as well as a marketing sales perspective. So we did that kind of annually too, in the same way. Most of it was around people for us. Because we were a software product, it took people to create the software. There wasn't like, I didn't have to go spend, $250,000 on a piece of CNC machinery like some guys I know, right? That's just something I didn't have to do. What about you, David?
Well, before we go to David, I want to say one more thing about this. I don't want to chase rabbits here, but I think it's important to the listeners to think through this. The majority of the time when I was in partnership arrangement with people, maybe 50% of the time, they had more capital or resources or net worth than I did. I was raising a young family. And I was all about taking more of the profits, more of a distribution, because I had two young kids and we've got school and we've got weddings. And so how does that play? How did that play in, Wally, with your partner? Because y'all were at different places. It kind of gets into the partnership arrangement and agreement as much as anything. So, but I do think this is a really important variable to consider when you're going into partners with somebody in business is be sure to have these discussions. We've got a situation now that we're currently dealing with, where we have to look at the principles involved and say, hey, we can't make that decision later based on people's needs. But when you're first starting out, it's good to have that conversation so that you know how you're going to divvy up the money.
So let me answer that. This actually goes back to something that I think David mentioned earlier, was that in the business that I was in the partnership arrangement that I was in, we had established that we had, this is really important, we had owner comp that we established up front. It was part of our salary. We actually paid ourselves as a W-2 in the business. So it wasn't like there's this pot of money we called profit and we're going to split that up. It wasn't like that. It was income first, earned income first. And we paid ourselves as best we could market rate if we had to replace ourselves. That was always part of our strategy. So in the very beginning, obviously, you couldn't do that, right? You kind of scraping by. Right. But as soon as you get level off a little bit, you say, okay, I'm a CEO. He's VP of sales or whatever. If I have to replace myself today, I get hit by the proverbial
the bus. That bus has killed a lot of people.
I know, a lot of people.
Taco truck.
Proverbial bus. Yeah, taco truck. Man, that'd be messy. Or something were to happen to him and I had to replace it. He had to get replaced in the business. What was it going to cost us to do that? Because if you don't plan on that income first, if you don't build that into your budgeting system first and how you're running your business, when something happens, all of a sudden now it's a major, not only do you lose the intellectual property of the person that was involved in the business, now you've actually got a financial hardship as well because you didn't plan for that well. And so by setting up earned income according to what's market rates as best you can up front, I think is really, really important. And then the profit comes after that. And so that's a much easier question to have because a lot of your immediate financial demands are satisfied in your earned income. So you don't have that elevated, I got to get all I can. At least that's been my experience. And so once we had that earned income part satisfied, then we started looking at the business of what the business needed and what we wanted to keep in to help us accomplish that next year. And what was remaining is what we took. And that worked for us.
So it's multi-layers there to get to the profit.
Yeah, right? that makes a ton of sense, especially with partnerships. That makes a ton of sense. Consider that whatever the business org chart should be, what would you pay those people if it wasn't you? And I think that's a really wise way to approach that. And early on when you're growing that business, you're kind of bootstrapping it and you are the flex, if you will. And you're putting in a lot more sweat equity to get something established. But as you're kind of camming over into that more profitable realm, I think it is important to view the org chart as the expenses of the business. And you are part of the org chart. So it's another one of these entrepreneur traps that prevent people, I think, from scaling up, is that they make themselves so essential in their business that they can't replace themselves very effectively. And that's probably a mistake if you want your business to be able to grow and be healthy. I think the book out there is called Designed to Sell or something or Built to Sell.
Built to Sell.
Which is just this concept of making sure that the roles within the business are scalable and that they can be trained and handed off to somebody else, because otherwise you have a real key person problem. But it does clarify that the business, payroll is an expense to the business. And so the business model needs to be able to support that. I just think that that's important to consider in a healthy business, that when you reach that size, you are a cost. And you can get more clever with it as the business owner. Probably easier when you don't have partners, but you can still do it with partners, where you set a salary that's maybe not as high as the market would necessarily bear, but you do it on purpose because you know that there's going to be profit because it's predictable, right? You've designed it in the business model, or it's predictable-ish, and that profit will ultimately be taken as draws, which may be more beneficial from a tax perspective to you.
That's true.
But it's by design. right? It's not by accident when you're doing it that way. So it's not like, well, I'm going to give myself below market pay and hopefully there'll be profit. What you're saying is there's, I could either pay myself as W-2 or I could pay myself in a more tax advantaged way. So I'm going to design it on purpose this way to be more tax beneficial to me as an owner. But that's just the idea of having a plan anyway, which underneath the hood of all of this is, you talked, Wally, about how the business for, software, you've got this constant need to reinvest within the business. I think buried in that question is, where do you reinvest? Well, in this case, it was mandatory if the business was to be healthy, right? If you didn't do it, the business could suffer. So that is also it's a reinvestment cost, right? I mean, it's weird to use both those. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. You need to reinvest. It's part of the model. And that means you need to have a multi-year vision and a multi-year expectation of what that's going to look like. It could be that, hey, we're going to grow to a point where we have to establish a second location. There's going to be costs associated with that. You can either prepare for it or it can arrive. And when it's there, then it becomes a pain point because you didn't prepare. So I think you always need to be not only working on what's in front of you, but you have to occasionally look up and look on the horizon and say, here's what's coming too, and we better adjust for that.
David, is there a rule of thumb when you're talking to clients about a percentage to reinvest in the company? Is there a rule of thumb or not?
If there is, I don't know it. Right? I think it's really industry specific. There's rules of thumb about what you reinvest out of your personal budget. So if you shake the business and what comes out of it that goes to you, you typically look for around 15% is a reinvestment between retirement plans and other assets so that you can build a nest egg separate from the business. If entrepreneurs are clever, you should be building that business to be sellable because there's an asset now that you're building there as well. Some people, their businesses are less sellable than others, but I think that's an element that you should consider in your strategy. But yeah, the how much do you reinvest in the business? There's probably some basic math. I mean, if anybody came and asked me that question, Big A, I'd say, well, what's the rate of growth in the business versus what's the rate of growth in other opportunities that you have?
Right.
And so, if I can earn 20% over here and my business grows at 5%, I don't know that I'm piling money into that asset because it's less attractive. But if my business is growing at 50% a year and everything else is growing pretty slow, then I'll do some things because it manages my personal tax bracket and I'll invest there. But reinvestment makes a ton of sense because look at the ROI.
David, I had a buddy of mine that called me a couple of years ago and he was wanting me to help him sell his company. And he said, Big A, he said, I got something pretty personal I need to talk to you about. And I said, okay. He said, you going to help me sell this? I said, yeah. He said, what am I going to do with the money that's in the company? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I've got some money and I don't really want my wife to know about it. And I said, wow, you're wanting me to tell you to lie to your wife? He said, no, that's not exactly right. But if
I didn't hear that yet, but
the money that's here, and I'm kind of taking us down a trail that a lot of business people deal with today. I mean, this is a real thing, but it's just a comical story. And I asked him, I said, well, Bill, how much is in the account? He said, well, there's $600,000 in there. And when I sell the company, I'm going to take this out, and I'm not sure what to do with it. So here's the thing. So how do we talk to our spouses about profits in the business? How do we talk to other members that are on the team about profit? What are you seeing as commonplace? How do you suggest and recommend? All these are not going to be a patent answer. We don't have a blanket to lay over each family. But what are you seeing in the industry that how people are communicating with their spouse and their team about the business funds or the profit?
That is all over the board, right? So when you're asking me, what do I see? I have seen everything from completely disengaged spouses to like really tight partnerships where they're synced up. The question I have is, why are they disengaged, right? Was that by design? Did one party not want to be engaged, or did one party try to keep somebody from being engaged? They're very different if you think about the subtleties between the two. And then what's the motivation, right? The story that you just mentioned, this friend of yours, and there's $600,000. Is he concerned that his wife is a big spender and she's going to view that
Oh,
as
yeah,
a
that was the
windfall.
total. That was it. He said, as soon as I tell her this is here, we're going to replace everything we got.
Right. And so therein lies some of the issue, right? I don't know that every spouse relationship makes for good business partnership. I just really don't. And it just depends on the wiring for everybody. And so I don't know. It's, I'm painting with a roller here instead of a brush saying, well, there is no cut and dry circumstance here. You look at the way the relationship works and the personality types involved and so forth. What I can tell you is there is a big picture thing that I see that I think is really important for entrepreneurs to understand. And that is that the business is not them, right? Early on, it might be, but at some point, the business becomes its own entity. And you have to view this as, look, I am shepherding or the chief executive officer, whatever you want to call it, but I'm responsible for an organization that's bigger than me. Just because I get to make the decisions on that doesn't mean that organization doesn't have its own separate responsibilities, right? And I think that the entrepreneurs that tend to be very successful and grow have this attitude that the business is that they may have started it may have been their baby, but at some point it becomes its own entity and it's doing things, and the decisions are made at the entity level rather than at the personal level. And again, I keep using this visual of like the business is kind of up above and you're shaking it up, and then whatever drops out is what you get. But the business has to be healthy before it can pay you. So it has to make decisions about how to reinvest for the business. And it's weird because you're basically wearing two hats now. You start out as it's one hat. The business and me are the same thing. But as the business grows, it's really you're wearing two hats. I have to wear my personal hat and then I have to take that off and put on that other hat and think differently about the business. My experience is that the spouses that are not well aligned, that one party doesn't see the separate hats well. They see it as that 600,000 is just it should be ours, right? We should be able to spend it on whatever you want. And you go, this business, for it to be healthy, needs its balance sheet to be healthy. And so you can't just suck the money out of there.
Can't kill the goose.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Let me throw this scenario out to you guys, because I've talked to a number of guys, and I'm sure guys in our audience listening are like, yeah, I've started. So here's a scenario. Starting a business, startup mode, been running 3 to 5 years. Margins, we haven't made a ton of money, but margins are kind of tight, right? I'm adding people. We're actually building a business now. And as I'm getting people on, like as part of the owner of the business, there's this, hey, like we're doing the best we can financially. Like, things aren't exactly what we want them to be yet. And sometimes people put a measurement up on the wall or whatever the case may be. And it's like, we're close, and there's this, there's a team, and this is part of our culture, and we're all in this. And there's this sense of like, yes, we're doing this together. We're building this thing. And then all of a sudden you start getting some profit. And so the owner's like, what do I do now? Like, I brought these people along this journey, and like, do I rectify if I haven't paid what I, market rates? Cause I brought them on this journey. They bought into the vision, and now I need to like correct their salary a little bit, their income a little bit, because I've been underpaying a touch. Do I still communicate with them in the same way? Like I used to communicate, we're right at the line. We're doing all right. Keep going. And now it's like, oh man, I got some. Like if I go to the meeting and say, look, we have some, like, what are we gonna do? Like, how does that change? And all of a sudden, like, you've brought your whole company, not your whole company, or even a few people, key leaders on your team with you to this point. And now is like the real test.
Now there's money.
There's
really
money.
To talk
That's
about.
right. And money matters at the end of the day. Like I've seen, the reason I say this is because this happened to me. 100% happened to me. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to other guys where it's happened as well. And I'm curious from your perspective, David, like, or Big A as well, like, if that's the situation, like I mentioned one thing about, getting salaries or income, wages corrected, if that's an issue for sure. But like, what are some other things that how we communicate as a business, we start making profit when we've communicated that maybe we haven't made as much profit?
I think it goes back to what we said earlier, we need to have this discussion in the beginning.
Yeah, I was going to say there's two words that I would bring up: expectation management.
Yes.
Right. And that happens in the beginning, not afterwards.
But it's easy for that business owner to like rally the troops and galvanize around this thing. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, okay.
Well, really, it's shame on us as a participant for not having it understood in the beginning.
That's fair.
That's the challenge with especially entrepreneurs is, you're not born as the Fortune 500 CEO, right? Those are skills that are developed. They don't just happen. And there's maybe some people that have personality traits that help with that. But when you start a business and you're wearing every hat, then you start distributing and magnifying the effort of labor through help, right? So that's hiring, and you start growing an organization up, then the culture is going to evolve. There are a couple things that I have to remind entrepreneurs. First of all, I wouldn't feel super guilty about success. Reason being, you were the one that took the risk, right? Everybody else trades their time for money with you, but you put it all on the line and had to build something. Now, your point is really valid, Wally, which is, what happens if you certainly don't want to unmake promises, right? That's lying, right? So you say dumb stuff, then you may have to pay the piper in a rough way because you said dumb stuff. So I advise some caution, but a lot of this is when you start your business, you should have a vision for what does it look like as it gets healthy. And we're just not excused from being good leaders, regardless of where we are in our organizational life cycle. So,
right. But what are some things I agree with you? I agree, guys, that we should absolutely do that from the beginning, right? I should have done that from the beginning. But if I haven't done that and I find myself there today, what are some practical things I can do?
I can tell you some, here's a practical thing that I would consider that is beneficial to, it's a way to distribute profit in a healthy way that both benefits the business and I believe benefits, and let me couch this really carefully. So everybody's listening, because I'm a professional financial advisor and I get paid to give advice, I have to be a fiduciary when I do this. And so every circumstance is going to be unique. So don't think this is automatically personal advice and come back to haunt me with it. But I'm going to give you some sort of generalities to go investigate. I think that a profit share through a company retirement plan is a really healthy way to look at how might you share in the win, give some vested interest, and sort of help make it feel as if, look, you're crossing the goal line on some of this, and I'm sharing in the wealth of the company. And it enables you to do something as well, and you can expense it out of the company to do so. Here's why I like this idea too. 401k plans offer vesting schedules. This is, in a sense, golden handcuffs, right? If you say, hey, for you to qualify for this profit, you have to keep working. We got here. You can't just take the money and jump. We want you to keep working, and we'll keep adding profit share each year. It's discretionary to the owner, though. Profit has to be there in order to make the profit share. But if you were to do that, then you can give a portion of whatever you're paying somebody in the form of this retirement bonus with a vesting schedule that says, you have to have served this many years before you get to keep it. So it's helpful as a retention tool for the business owner, and it's a way to share the profits in a healthy way. And you can also personally participate in that plan, get some of the money out of the business onto your personal balance sheet in a tax-deferred way, and set up a retirement nest egg. So it's worth investigating how you can do a profit share that's not just a discretionary bonus at the end of the year, take the money and go, but it is a tool for the business for retention that can be a part of your cultural value system too. Is like we reward longevity, we reward loyalty, and you can put high contribution amounts in.
David, are you seeing business owners that do this are very open to sharing with those that are participating the profit and loss or the balance sheet? Because savvy business owners can make a business unprofitable, but that are profitable.
Sure.
And so I've seen many cases where the employee becomes very disgruntled about the discretionary spending of the proprietor to where it's no longer profitable because he did X, or he's grown at a rate of X. So it comes with integrity.
It does, but keep in mind, there's a couple things, and I think the integrity is really important. I'm not trying to gloss over that when I say this. Yeah. Keep in mind that the profit share can be designed to be discretionary in nature. So it's not as if that doesn't give the proprietor discretion over whether or not to basically advance expenses or take personal draws that lower the profitability or remove the profitability from the business so that there's nothing to share. Okay. Like, I'm not talking about gaming a balance sheet here. I'm saying that this, I think, goes back to Wally's point, which is there's a certain amount of, call it like moral obligation to balance the scale, because you're saying, look, we made all these commitments to you, so I can adjust your pay. But if you have a little bit of, call it like owner's guilt over, hey, we're finally winning at this thing, but I'm really the biggest winner, even though you guys were all there before this was a reality. And so you've been carrying this dream with me, but you've carried my dream. What about your dream? I think it's a way to help transfer some of that without necessarily giving up the equity stake in the business. And the reason I'm not a big fan of giving up equity is, and this is just me, right, is one, it can dilute decision making, right? I mean, if you want to get into voting and non-voting and stuff like that, I think that oftentimes you want clarity in the decision hierarchy. And two, you took all the risk, right? That's the way capitalism works, is the person that does all of the risk taking. Had it gone wrong, it's all on you. Everybody else gets to walk away. They only see the upside at this point because you're there. But you had to carry the downside and the stress and the strain the entire time. And it's easy now that you're here to forget about that. And I think that's probably an entrepreneur challenge too, is that once you're there, you forget about the backstory and how much you had to like really scrape and scrap to get through that time. That was the whole reason you did it, was to get there. And
David, just a word of caution to some of the folks that are listening now to really think through what the plan looks like. And you mentioned it earlier, but we zipped right by it. Really look forward and really be thinking about what it's going to look like in the future when you become very profitable. Are you still willing to adhere to these guidelines? I've got a real life situation I'm dealing with currently with a client. Rallied the team, to Wally's point, got them on board. This company was doing probably $1.5 million annually, and everybody was excited. Everybody was making a good wage. Well, he had a percentage that he was sharing, and here we are now, 5 years later. This organization is doing about $1.2 million a month, and the participants, in his eyes, are being compensated more than they're worth. And he's like, man, what do I do now? I said, well, wait a minute. Don't forget who brought you to the dance. This team's been with you for 5 years, and now they're making a lot of money, but you're making a lot more money. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was very, very valuable when you said earlier, look at the horizon, see what it looks like, see if you can adhere to that rule or the percentages long term. Because let's face it, money changes people. Money changes things.
Yeah.
And we've really got to think through the scenarios before we make a commitment.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a ton of wisdom in that very straightforward statement, right? And I don't know that you can do contingency planning for everything, but one of the ways that I would advise that you communicate anytime you're early in a business is, we're going to do this for a season, and then we're going to reevaluate. Right. And so using that term and setting up the seasons of business,
I love that.
Is a way to communicate to somebody that, I'm committed to you doing well, and this is what we're going to do for a season, and even putting a review time out there and say, look, in 3 years, we're going to review this. And I just want you to be prepared for, if the business has changed, that, this is not it's not necessarily forever. Right? I mean, the needs change, rules change, laws change. Heck, our product line may change, and so it's all back to that expectation management. And I think that's going to happen in our lives forever, right?
This is really good, David. I've kind of recap in my mind of this conversation. I want the audience to really think through what it is that you're trying to do. If you're really recognizing the signs of profitability in your business and really make an informed decision about reinvesting versus saving. Just kind of think through some of these points that we've talked about today. I want you to really foster some open dialogues with your spouse or your partner about business finances. really ensuring that there's a mutual understanding and trust as you walk through dealing with profit situation in your business. And then finally, as your finances grow, transition from a reactive to a proactive stance. Everything in life should be proactive, not reactive. And I think this podcast episode today, talking about what to do with the profits, hopefully has opened your eyes a little bit and given you some things to think about. David, thank you so much. Wally, thank you for being here today. David, thank you for being here today. And David, it's been very beneficial. You've added a ton of value, man. So thank you for being with us.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Hey, guys, as we close out this episode, I just want to remind you, head on over to viewfromthetop.com/group. That will redirect you where you can continue the conversation we're having about this. Join us over there in the conversation. We have some questions that we throw out there, and some guys are starting to engage out there. Join us over there. Continue this conversation along with future episodes and actually some conversations about previous episodes. So if you go out to viewfromthetop.com/group, that'll redirect you to a private Facebook group. You can just ask to join that. We'd love to see you over there. So go join us over there, continue the conversation, and we will see you next time.